Welcome to the Proclaim Liberty podcast, a production of the Proclaim Liberty Initiative. I am Tim Gillespie of Liberty Church in Stroud, Oklahoma. To my right is Sam Ketcher of Hilltop Free Will Baptist Church, and to my left, Kelly Green of Hope Church in Shawnee. And across the table from us, we have some guy that we just have Dan Fisher. Dan, it's good to see you.
Man, it's good to see you. I just hate it that this early on you're so hard up for guests.
I know.
That you have. I mean, I'm kind of like the bottom of the barrel, aren't I?
Well, you know,
really.
We do in our cycle of who we pick, we have a charity case.
I understand.
So.
Well, I just want you to know I appreciate it.
Well, we tried to get Kelly's janitor from the church.
I understand, and he was booked.
He's on Free the States.
Well, we're glad to have you here. Dan
It's
is
good to be here.
a two-term state representative.
Yes.
And only reason why it wasn't a three-term is because he decided not to run again.
Yeah.
Co-pastor of Fairview Baptist Church in Edmond with Paul Blair.
Uh-huh.
Let's see what else. You're the vice chairman of the Oklahoma Second Amendment Association.
I am indeed.
Directors.
Yeah.
Am I missing anything?
Well, I had a very eventful run for governor here a few months ago.
You did, didn't you?
We did.
That was quite a deal.
It was. It really was.
And we definitely want to get to that. But one of the things we always do to begin with is we ask our guests to share their testimony of their conversion to Christ and then their conversion to abolitionism.
Yeah.
So
that's good. Well, you know, I grew up in a home where my dad was not a believer, but my mother was. And so we would go to church on Sundays, and he would look out the window of the house as we pulled out of the driveway. And went to this little church. To be honest with you, it was where my mother had grown up in Crawford. Actually, it was in Franklin County, Arkansas. So it's western Arkansas. Mm-hmm. It was about 8.
What was the name of the church?
You know, it was, you're not going to believe this, it was Fairview.
Oh, no way.
It was Fairview.
Wow.
Explain to he pastors at
Fairview Baptist in
Church.
Edmond.
Yeah.
But this is a whole different kind of Fairview. It was what they call a hard shell Baptist. Have you ever heard of the hard shell Baptist? Oh my gosh, these people are, I know why they're called hard shell. But anyway, the guy, whoever the preacher was, he was graded on how loud he could yell and how many times he could circle the pulpit and the altar. I mean, it was just unbelievable. So I would never listen. Of course, I'm an 8-year-old kid, but I was always very, very serious about who I was and God and all that. And so I'll never forget a Sunday we went home to my grandparents' house after church. It was the first time I ever remember that I could feel God actually tugging at my inner man. And I knew enough about the gospel to know what this was. And I'm walking the rows of my grandfather's garden. I'm just an 8-year-old kid. But I realized the Lord speaking to me, and I said, God, whatever you want in my life, you have it. And I surrendered my life to Christ right then. I went inside and told my parents, my grandparents, and everybody's crying, you know. And, so I started out pretty young. I was baptized a few months later in a creek outside of Mulberry, Arkansas. And I'll never forget, my father was there. He still was not a believer, but it's the first time I really ever saw him cry. Wow. And he was a pretty stoic kind of guy. Later on, he came to know the Lord, and it was a Free Will Baptist preacher that led him to the Lord. Of course it was, right? Yeah. And then, you know, at the age of 10, I felt called to preach in that Free Will Baptist church. In fact, Dr. Gilbert, not Dr. Gilbert, Gilbert Pixley was the pastor. I don't know if any of you guys ever knew of the Pixleys over in the western Arkansas area.
I know the name.
Rupert was his brother's name, and they were quite a team in those days. Anyway, I'm called to preach when I'm 10, and I start preaching when I'm 16, and I've been at it ever since, and I'm 62 now. So,
well, you don't look it.
I was about to say, that's
thanks
a hardy
a lot.
62.
No kidding.
Of course, I do jiu-jitsu against a 62-year-old, so they can be pretty tough.
Yeah, well... Anyway, so I've been serious about the Lord for a long time, been pastoring. I was a school teacher right out of college, but became full-time on staff in a church when I was 22. By the time I was 24, I was a senior pastor of a church in Poto, Oklahoma.
Oh, wow.
Southeastern Oklahoma. Was there for 8 years.
I thought that was Free Will Baptist territory out there.
Well, it kind of is.
Okay.
I mean, it is. And then I ended up in Yukon, Oklahoma in 92. Was there for 23 years. So I've been at it for a long, long time. So you asked me about abolitionism. I grew up at a time at First Baptist. This would have been the early 80s when Jerry Falwell was becoming a household word. And the moral majority was really starting to kind of shake America. And one of his big things was, of course, ending abortion. Right. In those days, the pro-life movement, I think, really was about ending abortion in those days. Right. And we didn't know all the verbiage to use, and we didn't know all of the trickery and deception that was going to come later.
Sure. Right.
So that's how I kind of was introduced to the whole idea of ending abortion. Of course, I always believed it was wrong. It was a sin. It was murder. So I always believed that. So early on, I got to know Dr. Falwell because he would come to our church there at First Baptist in Fort Smith, Arkansas. So I got to meet him. In fact, even as a young preacher, got to sit on stage with him, which was it was a pretty big deal in those days. So you go through the years and you begin to realize that something's dreadfully wrong with the pro-life movement because we just keep talking, but they keep killing. And so you're thinking, what is going on here? But for lack of not knowing what to do, I'm a big pro-lifer because I still think that the pro-life movement is all about ending abortion. And I'll tell you when the lights came on for me, it was when I was serving in the legislature in Oklahoma. And Tim, you mentioned that I was a two-termer, and I decided not to run that third term. I didn't have an opponent. Yeah. So I was a shoo-in. Right. And like I tell people, even I could win that race. And so I could have had a third term if I wanted it. Yeah. But the fakery, and I know that sounds incredibly cynical and maybe a little bit judgmental, but the fakery, I just couldn't take it. Yeah. But in addition, the legislature was not all I had. I'm preaching. I'm doing Black Robe all over the country. So I figured I could do a whole lot more good doing that. So I thought I was done with politics. Now, that all plays into this abolition answer that you asked me. But I'm watching in the legislature as all of these so-called conservative, many of them claim to be born-again Christians, waving around the pro-life flag every time they run for office, and I'm pro-life and I'm pro-gun and all that. Then they get up there. Right. And they become something else. And then I noticed that all of the pro-life bills really didn't do anything. And anyone that had any amount of teeth at all, the courts would just throw it out. Right. And so I started thinking, there's something wrong here. And then I think that the clincher for me is I was running a bill that had passed about 4 years before and had been sent to the governor's desk. The governor at that time was Brad Henry. That would have ended embryonic stem cell research in Oklahoma, made it illegal. Right. Now, I realize that's just a sliver of the whole murder industry, but it is ending it. Yeah. And one of the most well-known pro-life leaders in the state actually actively killed that bill. Yes. And it had already passed before, and we had more Republicans in the legislature and a Republican governor and the whole thing. So this thing was a slam dunk. But the chairman of the committee in the Senate wouldn't hear it. It already passed the House. We were going home.
Hear it because the advice of a pro-life leader given to him.
Yes. Yeah, in fact, the chairman told me that he would hear the bill if this pro-life leader would just ask him to hear the bill. He didn't even have to go public. He said, if he'll tell me he'll hear the bill, I will hear it. He told me that in his office. So I thought, well, heck, we just meet with this guy and tell him what we're trying to do. He'll say, well, of course, hear the bill. And then my Senate author said, if we hear the bill, it'll pass out of the committee like bang. It'll go to the Senate floor. Wow. And then we'll send it to that time Governor Fallon. She'll sign it. And at least embryonic stem cell research, which is murdering babies, will be over in Oklahoma.
You know, that seems to be a common thread with, well, I mean, it has
everyone
to be.
We
it
talk
has
to.
To be a common thread that, I mean, that's part of it. You're coming to that realization that the pro-life movement is not about stopping abortion.
No, it's exactly
They have no interest in stopping abortion. They want to keep their organizations going.
Sure.
So that they can keep getting paid. And so they can keep being a bigwig. Yeah. And so on and so forth. Yeah.
Well, they've built buildings. They have mortgages. They have payroll for staff. And, they're thinking about the bottom line, I fear. Yeah. Now, I don't think that the rank and file pro-lifer actually thinks that. In fact, here's what I discovered when I was running for governor. I know you said we'd get to that later, but I found out that the average person in the pew The minute they understand what abolition is, they look at me and say, well, I've always been one. I just didn't know.
Is this not
it.
what we're doing?
Exactly.
Well, you know, that's for me. It was I had you scheduled to come to my church to talk to my men's group,
And then what, you canceled me or something like
well,
that?
you called me with some crazy story about having a cold or something. I don't know.
Yeah, right.
But,
it was my CPAP machine. I reached over and hit the thing.
You're not supposed to
Well,
poke our guest.
well,
What's with you, man?
Man,
Well,
he kind of.
you
Well,
got to
anyway,
remember, I'm not a guest. I'm just a filler.
that's true.
Yeah,
We're waiting for the janitor.
This
to
is
come.
just a placeholder. A janitor will be here next time.
That's right.
That's fantastic.
But you sent Randy Rodman.
Yes.
Good old Ray.
And I had already kind of heard a little bit
Yeah.
up to that point, but his was the first full explanation.
Sure.
And I was like, okay.
Yeah. Well, that's what happened to me, Tim.
Yeah.
When someone finally explained to me just what the pro-life movement really had become, at least at the leadership levels, and then they explained to me that what I really was an abolitionist and didn't know it.
Right.
I said, you're right.
Right.
And at that moment then, I was an abolitionist. And,
you
and I've
had
been ever
already
since.
had this experience where you saw it in action.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And then someone else comes and says, well, this is kind of what you experienced. You're the third person who's been involved in politics who's come to me and explained this exact same scenario where
Wow.
they experienced.
Yeah.
I think we know who you're talking about, this pro-life leader. All of them had the exact same story that you just gave us about this pro-life leader influencing people against bills they were involved with. This guy is going around killing bills.
Yes. And the thing about this bill is it wasn't that it was my bill. In fact, it was someone else's bill that had almost made it through the governor's desk. So I'm just running that bill again.
Right.
And the thing about it is this bill would have passed, I know for a fact, and it would have actually done something.
Yeah.
That's why he stopped
And he killed it. No, that's exactly right.
But you know, I also see a pattern where we're hearing stories like, "Oh, the governor's already said they're going to pass this. If it'll just reach them, the governor said."
Sure.
But how much of it is the governor just does not want to get his hands?
There's a lot of that
dirty.
goes. I will tell you this. The first year.
know that, Sam.
That is true.
Well, I can tell. I can tell
They
you
just
this.
never seem to reach him.
That's right.
Yeah.
I can tell you this: the first year of Governor Stitt's term, Governor Stitt told the legislative leaders that he wanted the constitutional carry to be the first bill he signed. That bill went from introduced to the governor's desk
Of course.
in a month. The deadlines are, they've got deadlines, 3 weeks for this, 3 weeks for this, 3 weeks for this, and on and on and on. So the bills start getting to the governor's desk. They start trickling in March and April, unless it's a bill that's a big deal to the governor or the legislative leaders. He said, I want that bill I want that to be the first bill. He signed that thing in March.
Yeah.
So is it your opinion, having been up there, that if there's really something that the governor really wants in terms of like a pro-life bill,
Yeah.
he'll get it?
Yeah, of course.
So if he's not getting something, maybe he's not enthusiastic about it?
Could be.
Possibly.
Yeah, and here's
I
the
thought
deal.
this was the most pro-life candidate who was running.
Yeah, but you got to remember, you got to qualify that. He would say he's the most pro-life because I have 6 kids, which was actually an insult to the whole
guy's more
pro-life
pro-life than that.
concept. Yeah, and the thing is, it's not that the executive branch is forcing the legislative. It's just the power of the bully pulpit and the role of a governor who's supposed to be the chief executive of the state, and it's the influence that they have.
And
so he's really doing the right thing in that respect.
Yeah. And when you have the legislature controlled by supermajorities of your own party, where you can say, hey,
Don't
guys,
make me gag.
I want
Dream of
this.
that.
Yeah.
Governors dream about that.
Oh, it's exactly right.
And look how much we can do for pro-life.
Democrat governors dream of that. Republican governors don't like it because then they actually might have to do something.
They have to put up for sure.
Yeah. Here's the thing with Governor Stitt. Obviously, when I'm campaigning, I'm not with him a lot, but I'm at a lot of events where he's there.
Yes.
And we're being asked the same question over and over, and they all heard my answers, and he certainly did, because there were some of those where he was sitting right beside me.
I saw. Yeah.
And he knew the difference between ending abortion, knowing it's murder, and just playing around by nipping at the edges and actually regulating what is horribly wrong. Right. He knows the difference. Guys, he claims to be a born-again Christian. His dad was a pastor, I think, down in the Norman area for 30-some-odd years. Okay.
I went to church with Kevin sitting beside me in Sunday school class.
So you went to John's church?
John's church. He was very pro-life. Yeah. And that's all we had back then.
No, of course, and maybe innocently so, like that's I was. Right. Yeah. I thought I was on the right side of that thing.
So he knows what's right.
Of course he does.
He knows what.
Of course he does.
History should have him do.
Yeah. Well, I found that the major issue, well, I don't want to say the major because I think there are a number of them, but I think number one in most of those legislators' minds is getting reelected. Right. That's the number one thing. Yeah. I mean, even with freshmen, when I was there as a freshman, I'm still trying to find out where all the bathrooms are. I hear some in my freshman class talking about all these fundraisers that they're having. We haven't been there a month yet, and they're already raising money for the next election. Well, that won't be for 2 years. And I thought, well, maybe we ought to do some governing first before we do some reelecting.
What a novel concept.
Yeah. So getting reelected, but then the second thing is they want peer approval. Yes. There's groupthink up there. And then thirdly, they're just like most preachers today, unfortunately. They want to avoid controversy at all costs. Yeah. So the speaker and the pro tem in the Senate and the speaker in the House, they will kill anything that, and they'll tell you. I had it said to me many, many times, we don't want to put our members in an awkward position and have to make a difficult vote. So they'll just kill stuff. Yeah. And the speaker or the pro tem have that kind of power. They'll just kill a bill.
So they have no conviction.
No, you're exactly right. They have convictions.
Yeah.
But it's for their stuff.
Right.
Well, and the only way you can get to that kind of position is
compromise.
Is compromise and playing the game.
Yeah, I had people ask me, Dan, once you run for speaker, you make a great speaker. And I said, well, I don't know if I make a great speaker, but I could never get there. They say, what? It's almost all Republican. Well, yeah, but so many of them are moderate, I can't get their vote. I'd have to make too many promises. And if I kept those promises and wasn't a liar, then I wouldn't be who I am.
Right.
And I'm not going to do that.
Speaking of which,
okay,
the ad, the Kiss and Babies ad. We're gonna splice that in here.
Cool.
So we're gonna watch it and then we're gonna talk about it.
Oklahoma is in trouble. Things are a mess. Our neighborhoods aren't strong enough. Our jobs aren't new enough. Our kids, they aren't schooled enough, and our schools aren't funded enough. The government isn't accountable enough. We just can't seem to catch a break. We've lost all hope. Where do we turn for help? Who will save us?
I'm Dan Fisher. I'm local and religious, and like other candidates, I have a family.
I wasn't born in Oklahoma,
but I live in Oklahoma. And I love the Sooners and the Thunder and OSU and Tulsa. They're all my favorites. And I'm on a horse.
I served 2 terms in the Oklahoma House of Representatives, where my work made a huge difference. Now it's time to take it to the next level.
I'm gonna make everyone smarter.
Give everyone jobs. Rebuild our infrastructure. Protect life. Do all of the things that governors do.
And make Oklahoma great again. These are not just hollow promises. I can do this. Hey, I can do anything. You can splice that together, can't you?
I've assembled a team of experts to help me navigate the pressing issues of our day.
And solve all our problems. Turn things around. Fix the mess. Just a little off the top.
Dan Fisher, proven conservative, an established Republican who talks to old people and walks with young people of all races.
I'm Dan Fisher, and I approve of this message.
All right, can you turn just a little bit slower, Dan, and maybe puff your chest out and put your hands on your hips?
Yeah,
just
okay. What does this have to do with governing?
Cut.
What are we doing?
Dan, this is what you do. Keep it simple, but be strong and be vague.
Well, I want to talk about my actual platform. I'm running a campaign here on ideas and putting those principles into action. Shouldn't we be sharing that with the voters and let them decide whether or not they support them?
Well,
Dan, how about we film your thing, and then we'll decide what to put in post. Will that work?
Yeah,
All right,
sure.
let's try that.
Okay, all right. Friends, I'm a statesman, not a politician. I'm running for governor to establish proper government and assert state sovereignty to abolish human abortion.
Dan, you're going to scare the voters with this.
More importantly, you're going to frighten the funders.
Guys, this is what I believe. This is what I'm running on.
We hear you, but you are a Republican. Just say you're pro-life and check that box.
And move along.
I'm not just pro-life. I'm an abolitionist. I'm trying to end abortion. All of my opponents are pro-lifers. There's a real difference between the two. In fact, if conservatives want to ensure that abortion remains legal in Oklahoma, they can vote for Mick Cornett or Todd Lamb.
Dan, you can't say that.
Well, I just did.
This is campaign politics 101. You should never tell anyone they can vote for your opponent.
Well, if folks are afraid to stand up against Washington and fight federal overreach, they shouldn't vote for me because I will do that.
I can't handle this.
If you're not even going to listen to me, why are you paying me?
Just keep rolling. Folks, I'm not a millionaire. So I can't plaster my face all over the state. I can't run countless commercials using strong phrases and making big promises just to get you to vote for me without even thinking. I can only tell you what I believe and what I'm committed to do if elected. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to go to my website. I want you to read my platform. Watch my videos. Compare me with the other guys running for governor. Actually, guys, could you put their website addresses on the screen to make it easier? If I thought any of the other guys running for governor would establish justice, they would assert state sovereignty, I probably wouldn't even be in this race. Now, I don't want you to vote for me just because you've watched this commercial or you see my name somewhere else. I want you to vote for me because you believe in the principles that I believe in, and you want to help me to put them into action. I'm Dan Fisher, and I approve this message.
Oh, wow. That's
So good.
so good, man.
Man, I should be the governor.
Why is this guy governor?
Let's have a vote right now. All
Let's
those
do
in
it.
favor of Dan
All
Fisher
right,
being
he'll
the governor,
vote
say
no.
aye.
Dan's the governor now.
I'm fine.
Aye. You're in.
You didn't vote.
Thank you so
Don't
much.
worry,
huh?
Kevin. I'll bring
Well, I
the
don't want to be
U-Haul
in.
up there. You're going back to Tulsa, buddy.
Hey, he'll let him, like Fallon did her daughter. You'll let Stitt live in a camper outside the ranch.
Heck yeah, man.
Run an extension cord.
Well, here's the deal. I'm from Arkansas, and so a double wide, man.
There we go.
Right there in the back.
There you go.
Awesome.
The governor.
Think of that.
You put it right next to the oil
double
derrick
wide.
out front.
Yeah,
is
chicken
Arkansas.
house, goats.
I'm telling you. You could sell your eggs and the goats.
Have you a granny in a rocking chair?
Governor
Bail
eggs.
this state out, man.
That's right.
That was wonderful.
We're solving the state's problems right now.
No, but without a doubt, that
We got to
is-
hear the story behind this commercial.
Yeah.
How in the world did you get from you're running and all of a sudden that thing
Yeah.
shows up and everyone's going, what in the world was that?
Yeah, well, we knew, number one, that a guy like me is probably not going to be able to raise millions of dollars.
Yeah.
It's kind of set up that way, just to be honest with you. So you almost have to be a millionaire so you can self-fund.
Right.
We kind of knew that. I mean, we weren't being negative about the thing, but so we said,
But
what
you're
are
not
we
a
going to
millionaire?
do?
I mean, you're a preacher. I thought all preachers had that.
Well, I mean, you know, as far as they know.
I'm a millionaire. You're not a millionaire?
Oh, hey.
I need to start coming to your church.
I've watched some TV
need
preachers, and they
to.
said I'm supposed to be a millionaire.
You must be living in sin.
You don't have faith.
I ain't got enough faith.
That's what it is.
What do I need to do? Just claim it?
You've been believing in faith, not faith.
If you sow a seed into all of our churches,
into your ministries.
that's right.
Well, a little more into mine.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so-
what story?
So number one, so we knew, hey, we're not going to probably be able to buy a lot of airtime. This is early, obviously, in the campaign, so you never know. So I said, what can we do? How can we get our message out there? And they said, well, what we've got to do is we've got to do something that will clearly separate us from everybody else.
You did that.
Because all the other
That
Republicans.
blew up.
Yeah, it did.
Well, I
it
guess
went
you
nuts.
needed the breakthrough.
As
because
we
of
had to
lack
have
of
it.
funds.
Yeah.
That cleared the tarmac.
Yeah, so to give you an idea about the funds, and I made it to the primary, obviously. To get to the primary, we spent $341,000 to get to the primary, okay? The three guys that finished ahead of me, and only two of them of course, got to go into the runoff, together spent $13.5 million to get to the primary, just to the primary. So that's the kind of inequity that you've got there. So we said, so what can we do? And they said, well, what we need to do is cut something that no one would ever cut, and that's a 5 or 6 minute commercial. You're never going to be able to raise the money to put that on television, but let it set you apart, and then let's put it on social media and see what happens. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to make fun of, in a good-hearted kind of way, I mean, obviously, we wanted to make fun of all of the typical establishment lines. So one of the candidates that was running for governor was saying one of his big deals is he's going to make stronger neighborhoods. Now, let me just ask you, how in the Sam Hill are you going to make neighborhoods stronger?
Well, he could have done
Gated
it.
communities.
He could have done it, right? So they're
We're too
using
stupid.
phrases like that, and they've always got a family, and they're always saying they're grinning with their family, and I'm, third generation Oklahoman, and so that's why I said, well, I wasn't born in Oklahoma, but I live, and all that kind of stuff.
The best part was the baby comes sliding in.
Oh yeah, I'm right. The
That
deal
was
they just
my
stick the
favorite
baby in. Yeah. So what we did is I really had a tremendous group of creative people donating all of their time, and they just came up with these ideas. And of course, we would think tank it, and we threw it together. Some of that, even though we had it scripted, some of it we were kind of doing on the fly. Just to be honest with you.
That was fantastic.
Yeah.
I probably would not have known who you are
Yeah,
until
sure.
that came across my Facebook, and I was like, what is this? And I'm sharing that out to people saying,
Yeah.
who is this guy?
Yeah. At the first, and the reason we started off the way we started is we wanted to kind of trick people into thinking this is another one of those typical. Yeah. But if you go back, and obviously we knew the inside out. If you listen to the lines that I'm saying, even there, you can tell I'm really spreading it on thick. Like, our neighborhoods just aren't strong enough. Our schools are just not funded. So we showed the OU Stadium. I mean, what place in Oklahoma is not funded well enough like that? Yeah. So all of that kind of stuff. And then the baby coming in, the kissing the babies. And I just stopped like this and keep right on going. The horse.
Yeah, and I'm on a horse.
Yeah. And of course, all the teams are my favorite.
They're
all
your favorite.
Yeah, they're all my favorite. And so anyway, and then of course the end of it, we decided now, after we've kind of caught everybody off guard and they finally are into this, now let's figure out a way to let you say what you really want to say. So we just decided what we'll have is a walkout. I'll have my whole film crew just say, you can't do that. Your consultant says you're blowing this thing. Mm-hmm. And then one of the guys said, well, why don't we, while you're saying what you really believe, we'll just start tearing everything down.
Yeah.
And so they did. It worked. It was really cool. One of the funny things, and I'd mentioned this a while ago to you guys. There was a fellow that worked for some consultants in Washington, D.C., and he called his mother and said, Mom, you got to see this. She lives here in Oklahoma. So she watches it, and of course she becomes a supporter immediately. Right. And then later on during the campaign, I ran into her, and she said, you have got to know this. My son works in D.C., and he said that your commercial is the talk of D.C. as far as all of the political consultants, because they've never seen anybody commit suicide that fast. No, they actually thought it was pretty cool. Yeah. I mean, obviously it's 5 minutes, and so you could not afford a 5-minute commercial. But anyway,
well, and you have seen some ads coming out of DC now that were Now they're kind of making fun of themselves.
Slightly more creative,
Yeah.
but nothing like that before
started
you did that.
Right.
Yeah, the biggest thing that I was worried about is that it would just be so cheesy, that it would just be over the top cheesy. So we tried to make it look like we were trying to be serious, but we were just stupid.
I think you walked the line pretty good on it.
You were Babylon B before Babylon
That's
B.
right.
Really,
Babylon Bee.
one of the parts I love the most is where we had the voiceover of a really wonderful young lady, and she says, "Dan Fisher, he talks with old people."
Yeah, I love
And, there I'm sitting there, and then he walks with young people. Because these guys are always doing that kind of stuff, and they're always on a construction site. So if you notice, I'm pointing on, but. It's like I'm an idiot. I'm pointing at nothing.
We're going to fix the sky.
The guy looks at the camera like,
yeah, it's exactly right. So it was, to be honest with you, it was a lot of fun, and it stretched me because I'd never done anything quite like that.
Well, I got a question for you.
Okay.
Did any of the other candidates privately come to you and talk to you about that commercial?
Yeah, I had some of them.
That's the craziest
Yeah,
thing.
they actually said, that's pretty cool. Now, they didn't like it because if you go through and look, we're taking jabs out.
You're taking jabs
Yeah,
out.
every one of
we're
them,
giving
yeah.
jabs.
And I have a family.
Yeah, that's exactly right. See, and then, at the end of it, I said, if they want status quo, they can vote for Mick Cornett or Todd Lamb. And I know Todd. And I think
all
he
is
probably
fair
took
in love
that.
and war and politics.
Well, it's true when they're doing it.
Right.
It's just when it's done to them that they don't like it so much.
One of the biggest shocks to me, the shockers of that campaign or the governor election, I just cannot believe that the Tiger King did not go as far as any further.
If
they didn't know about him then.
That's true. That's
Yeah,
true.
he would have gone further later.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's
Once he's incarcerated.
And actually, that's really sad, Kelly, because I think had the series come out first and then he had run for governor, he might be the governor.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
I've had people come up to me since that series was on. I never saw it, but I've had people say, the Tiger King? I mean, they're serious. I was afraid they were going to ask me for my autograph because I was on the Tiger King. I didn't even have a role. It's just footage that they're showing from some of these gubernatorial deals. And my son, who at that time was in med school, said, "Dad, you are a celebrity at college. People are asking me, that's your dad? He knows the Tiger King." I said, "Son, play it for everything it's worth."
Milk it. Right. I was watching Tiger King. I was like, "That's Dan Fisher.
That's him."
Yeah.
There's the baby kisser right there.
Yeah, right there. So,
if Exotic Joe would have been governor, we would have all been able to dumpster dive for out of
you
Walmart
better
meat.
believe it. Yeah.
That would have been great.
Yeah.
I guess I didn't follow his campaign as closely as you did. So.
Well,
Obviously, you haven't watched the Tiger King.
Well, let me tell you, guys, he is one different kind of guy.
Yes.
You think?
Wow.
I think that's the understatement of the century.
Well, it
right there.
probably is, but oh my goodness.
He never
gracious.
financially recovered from that.
He would show up. I mean, he would show up. These are not debates, obviously. They're little commercial forums, is what they are. Right. He would show up at those things wearing a Western gun holster, and they wouldn't let him bring the pistol on, so he'd just wear an empty holster. And I don't know if you ever saw him stand up, he's got it on. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life.
It's an empty holster protest.
Well, it must be. But, he is the strangest collage of thoughts because some of his stuff is dead right.
Right.
I mean, he's right on some stuff. But then, boy, he is whacked out on other stuff.
That's the meth talking.
Well, maybe so. Maybe so.
Well, that talk about some of the other stuff you're doing these days. The Black Robe Regiment.
Yeah, sure.
I know kind of how we got acquainted was before you were in the house. And
sure.
I had started OK2A, and you and Paul Blair were doing the Reclaiming
America for Christ. Yeah.
And worked on several different things
and
so forth. But Black Robe Regiment, how did you come to the point where that was your thing, basically?
Yeah,
I mean, it's
Well, I tell you, the Black Robe Regiment is something that most people don't know much about.
Yeah, tell everybody what.
Yeah. Let me first introduce. I wrote this book. Actually, since we're talking about me serving the legislature and campaigning, I actually wrote this book while I was running for the legislature the first time. So you're talking about being out knocking doors, then going home at night and writing this book and doing research.
You're a busy man.
Well, I was, and this is kind of a textbook. I wrote it for that purpose, so that preachers and others who I knew wouldn't go look up the quotes and do the homework. It's there for them. Yeah. So it's pretty. But the Black Robe Regiment were actually initially called the Black Regiment by the British. They were the preachers of the 18th century, and they had been preaching from their pulpits actually since the First Great Awakening about the Christian's responsibility to be engaged in every area of life. They didn't believe in compartmentalization. See, today we kind of look at things as, well, this is my spiritual life and this is my secular life.
Right.
And we don't mix the two. When, of course, Paul says, do everything as unto the Lord.
That's right.
So that's what that generation believed. So these preachers have been preaching the principles of proper government, the need for Christians to engage.
Wait. You mean to tell me that the Bible talks about government and about how
It really does.
No, there's no interaction with government entities in the Bible.
Separation of church and state.
Right, we're supposed to stay in our pews, right?
That's exactly
Moses
wrong.
said, just go vote.
Yeah, so these guys are preaching this stuff from their pulpits, and they're railing at the British, and of course, as the stranglehold tightens on the colonies, these guys become louder and louder. Many of them are serving in government. In fact, Peter Muellenberg, who's on the back of the book, and there's a chapter in here. There's about 6 or 7 chapters of just individuals that I wanted to point out. And Peter Muellenberg's kind of the quintessential guy. He's the one that pulls off his robe and reveals the colonel's uniform. He was serving the Virginia House of Burgesses with George Washington and Patrick Henry. Wow. And they recommended him to be commissioned as a colonel to form the 8th Virginia Regiment, which is, of course, the 8th one in Virginia.
For people who don't know, he's the guy in the middle of his sermon and everything.
Pulls off his robe.
Then he goes,
yes, pulls off his robe.
Like
and there's the colonel's
soldier.
uniform. Yeah. And then he proceeds to recruit the men from his church, and then the guys in the community hear all the ruckus going on. They come up there, and all these guys in the community start signing him up. And he actually leads the 8th Virginia Regiment all through the war from 76 to 83. And he becomes a part of George Washington, General Washington's staff. And by the time the war is over, he's promoted to Major General. He is in the famous John Trumbull painting of the surrender of Cornwallis. He's seated on a horse. His statue is in the national capitol in the Statuary Hall. Wow. Pennsylvania chose him as one of their honorees, so he's there in D.C. today. He's the quintessential. There's tons of them. I tell their story. So anyway, I heard about the Black Regiment, and I thought, who are these guys? So these are the guys that were preaching from their pulpits, leading their men off to fight that most people don't know anything about. I hear about them, and they say black robes, and I'm thinking they're judges. It's the only people I know that wear black robes. Then it turns out they were the preachers of the 18th century, because it didn't matter what denomination you were, Lutheran, Presbyterian, Baptist, whatever, you preached in a black robe. So the British knew that they were actually public enemy number one. And I think I proved fairly conclusively in this book that without them, there probably would have never been a war of independence. Right. We wouldn't know America as we know it today without the preachers. And so anyway, they're fanning the flames, and the British realized, man, we got to neutralize these guys. So they called them the Black Regiment. Now, there never was a regiment of preachers. It's just that's what they called them. These guys were leading regiments all over the country.
Well, you know, that's the sad commentary on the state of the church today is that I don't think there's really anybody in the government that's all that worried about the preachers.
They're really not.
Oh, man.
They're really not.
And
that's sad.
You know, and I know kind of.
They don't fear the preachers at all.
I know. And kind of.
I'm not sure the devil does either.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Amen.
Yeah.
Well, kind of an integral part of this conversation is also, if you want to hold that book up.
Oh, yeah, sure. Sure.
Dan's got a book on Romans 13.
Is that new?
Brand new. In fact, it's just been out a few months.
You know, the
Black Robe Regiment clearly didn't have Romans 13 in their Bible.
No, it's exactly. Well, yeah. Well, they just didn't read those parts. You know, it's just not supposed to mix politics and religion.
Well, you know,
church and state and all
I remember one time when I was speaking for our state executive board on the lottery, against the lottery and the gaming compact. I was actually at the district meeting for the district my church was in.
Yeah.
And I had got up and I had gave my spiel and I sat down. One of the other guys walked up to me and he said, I don't agree with this. You shouldn't be up there doing this. And I looked at him and said, go home and read the prophets.
Yeah.
And then come and
The
talk
who?
to me about that. Read all those those guys that stood up in front of the king and went, "You better deal with this, or God's
That was
going
their
to deal
entire
with you."
job.
Right.
Yeah.
You
Did
know,
you ask him, should you play golf? Should you vote? Should you
he
pay
came-
your taxes?
Well, he
Should
came
you-
back, to his credit. He came back about 6 months later. I saw him, and he said, "You know what? I'm sorry. You were right."
Wow.
And
We need to get that guy a copy of this
I
book. Who is he?
know.
Well, and it was a Baptist governor that spearheaded the lottery.
Yeah. I
From-
know. Thank you very much, Sam.
Claremore, right?
Appreciate that reminder. It's
You're
good.
welcome.
I know we need to make clear there it's Southern.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, it was
Southern
Southern
Baptist.
Oh, yeah, well,
And,
that's
Bill
different.
Clinton was a
Baptist
Southern
would've
Baptist
stood in
too.
line.
That's right.
Man,
We wouldn't have put
they
up
produced
with that.
some good guys.
But you know the whole notion today with that so many pastors have that the IRS is going to come down on them. Which first of all, if they did, so what? But
No, that's right.
But it's not going to happen.
yeah, it's not going to happen. I think one of the things that Alliance Defending Freedom used to have the Pulpit Sunday initiative.
Yeah, Pulpit Freedom Initiative. In fact, I was one of the original 33 that they chose and vetted and trained, and we actually committed a crime in our pulpits because we endorsed candidates on purpose to try to get the IRS to come after us, and we even sent them our sermons. The next day on Monday, we said, "Hey, this is what I preached in my pulpit yesterday. I was exercising my First Amendment right."
Well, when they started,
No,
they
they're
started
saving
opening.
that. They got that file.
Well, when they
They're
started,
saving
I
that
know
on you.
you're probably right.
when they started opening that up too, I had done that several years
Sure.
before I was in drum
Yeah.
right. And it
Good for you. Thank you.
You know, it just the notion you read Romans 13, they like to use verse 1 and maybe
of
verse
course.
2,
Yeah.
but they don't read verses 3, 4, and 5.
They don't.
Where it gives a qualification of what godly authority is.
Oh, that's
how godly
exactly right.
authority behaves.
Well,
And-
Tim, and I don't mean to interrupt, but they also seem to forget all of the other passages in Scripture where God not only approves but blesses and applauds those who stood up against tyranny,
right.
like Hebrew midwives that refused
expects
to,
it, yeah.
and just all through Scripture, Daniel that knew it was against the law, and it was only a 30-day law. So I mean, couldn't he just not pray for 30 days?
Right.
But he does it anyway. His 3 asbestos buddies that wouldn't, bend, bow, and burn, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, the whole deal is. These guys set an example for us. Unfortunately, it's been lost. And so what I wanted to do is kind of help bring that back to life. So since then, since about 2008, I've been traveling around doing it's kind of become like a one-man Broadway production where I actually, in period clothing, I become some of these guys and I tell their story. We use a lot of multimedia, big screen with all kinds of images and sound effects, and I bring these guys' story to life. We even have this traveling museum that we bring with us that people get to see and hold the items, and they're really, really cool.
And we will actually, at some point in the podcast, we will include a video of some of the toys that Dan has brought
that's cool.
today.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I'm sorry, Sam.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I would encourage folks who may be hearing this for the first time, or they've heard of the Black Robe Regiment, or they've struggled with Romans 13 and they don't know what to believe, to go to my website at danfisherbrr.com, and they can get these materials. We even did a documentary. We spent a ton of money with a Hollywood production crew, and we actually did a documentary that is kind of the 30,000-foot view of this textbook that folks can show. I've had pastors show this in their churches, use clips of it in their sermons. That was the whole reason we did it.
Right. Yeah.
So we're trying to bring this story back to life, not because I want us to have to go to another war.
Right.
But if the pulpit will stand up and speak out, we won't have to.
That's right.
Well,
But you can see what's happening in Canada. I mean, they're arresting these guys, throwing them
they're
in
arresting
jail.
preachers for the
Well,
last
let's-
2 weeks.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. 'Cause
Okay, let's do it.
Go back to the thing about preachers thinking that the IRS is going to come down on your church.
Yeah.
You know, I did a lot of research on this back about that time, and I was trying to get the information fed out through our state executive office to pastors.
Sure.
And one of the things that I found is that there'd only been one time, first of all, the Johnson Amendment was passed in what, 54? And it says that nonprofits cannot endorse candidates and so on and so
Or
forth.
speak out against them.
Speak out against them, so forth. Now, before that was that was not anything that was on the books, and it was common. I've got a two-set book, can't even talk.
Yeah.
A couple of books.
That's good.
That political sermons from the founding
books.
era.
Oh, wow.
I have many
I got a
leather-bound
couple of
books.
books.
That's wonderful. He's got 2 books, guys.
But,
Gotta have a straight guy.
You really do.
a straight guy that can't talk tonight. Also.
Yeah.
But you read what some of those guys said,
Oh, my
and it was,
gosh.
they didn't pull any punches.
No, they didn't. There's excerpts of those sermons in this book based upon whatever the chapter's about and the subject matter. And because I knew a lot of guys wouldn't go do the research and look them up. And you read what these guys preach, and you can't believe it. I mean, it's exactly what you want them to say, but no one will say.
Yeah.
And this whole IRS thing, you were kind of getting to that Johnson Amendment deal. There's only been one church that's ever been penalized, and let me tell you what they did. They removed their letter of intent.
Right.
That's it. There's never been a church in the history of the IRS that has lost either their nonprofit status or have been shut down or anything because they can't do it.
It's a paper tiger.
Yeah, the whole Johnson Amendment, you got to remember the Johnson Amendment is a law, but it's in the tax code. Mm-hmm. It's not a freestanding law.
Yeah.
It's something that Johnson slipped in to the tax code because there were some conservatives in Texas that were connecting him to communism when he was running for a second term as senator from Texas. Yeah. And so he slipped this in as a first-term senator to shut those guys up in Texas. That's all that was about. And initially, it didn't even say churches. That came later.
Yeah.
So this whole thing, in fact, the IRS admitted unofficially after a few years of the Pulpit Freedom Initiative, because many guys like you then began to participate. The last recorded Pulpit Freedom Sunday that we had, where pastors actually contacted ADF and said, hey, I participated, there were over 1,600 pastors who did that.
Wow. I think
and they admitted we can't do anything about it.
Well, year after year, they didn't.
Yeah, no, we still do it.
Well, and the thing is that one church that you're talking about, if I remember the story correctly, I believe they took out a big ad.
A full-page ad in the USA Today.
Yeah, in USA Today to
against Clinton.
Against Clinton.
And they solicited funds in the ad, which was the big no-no.
And that's what actually got him in trouble.
That's exactly right.
But even at that, it was.
But there was no trouble. Yeah. I mean, it was all just persecution and propaganda.
But they've done such a good job of getting pastors to. And actually, I think they've done a good job of getting pastors to self-censor. But they've also really done a good job of getting deacons and church boards to censor.
No, you're exactly right.
Oh,
because the pastors come and go, but the deacons and the church board stays. And don't you dare mess with our 501c3 status.
You know, here's the dirty secret about that 501c3 thing. Of course, C3 means corporation.
Right.
Many, many years ago, back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, churches were not 501c3s. From the very beginning of America, churches have been tax exempt. Right. Because the framers saw the church as a sovereign entity. It's just like the federal government doesn't tax Oklahoma.
Right.
Because Oklahoma is a sovereign entity. So the federal government can't tax a state. Right. They saw the church as the same. So churches are automatically tax exempt. But back in the 70s and 80s, people started suing churches. They'd trip and fall, and they'd sue the church and try to break everybody in the church. And so there was this belief that if you would incorporate as a 501c3, you could protect your members from litigation, and all they could do is sue the corporation. Unfortunately, what that did is it started this whole avalanche of churches becoming corporations. Right. But today, a church does not have to be a 501c3 to be tax exempt. The IRS looks at all churches as 501c3s, whether they are or they aren't.
Right.
And so I actually encourage people today, if you're not a 501c3, don't become one. You don't need to be.
When do you think, was it with Johnson or was it with, the 70s with the 501c3? When did preachers start self-censoring and start becoming cowards, basically?
Well, I think it started earlier than that. There was a strong movement of separation of church and state that started probably right after World War II. I don't know that there's anything special about World War II, but in the late 40s, early 50s, and I think what happened there is the institutions of higher learning, both religious and non-religious, had been so infiltrated by Marxists. Mm-hmm. Now, they didn't call themselves Marxists because that would have been the death stroke for them. They had so infiltrated that they had so undermined who we were at our beginning that no one knew our true history.
It was the rise of modernism, right?
That's exactly right. And so they started teaching this lie. It's literally a lie about separation of church and state. And it comes from a letter written by Thomas Jefferson, oddly enough, where he's writing the Danbury, Connecticut Baptist Association, saying that there's a wall of separation in the Constitution, because they had heard that while he was president, it's 1802 when he writes this letter, that he's going to establish a certain denomination as the national church. Well, it was all a lie. There wasn't going to be anything like that. And so he tells them, I can't do that. There's a wall of separation. Now, what he meant was there's a wall that protects the church from government. They've taken that little phrase, flipped it upside down, and said the wall is supposed to protect government from the church. It's the opposite of what Jefferson meant. Right. So that's where the phrase.
You mean kind of like Romans 13 has been
kind of like Romans 13. Yeah. And so that's where this phrase separation of church and state comes from. Well, by the time you get all of this Marxist infiltration of the universities, Bible colleges, Bible seminaries, you're beginning to churn out these guys that if they don't believe it, they're at least starting to question. You have members who are now hearing, well, we're not supposed to talk politics in the pulpit. Right. Then the 501c3 thing, even though Johnson did it, no one knew about it. Right. That was later when people started using, people meaning people in government, trying to intimidate churches. 501c3, you don't want to lose your tax-free status. You're not going to lose it anyway. You don't have to be a 501c3 to have that anyway. Right. But by now, you've got people in the pews, Tim, you said it, who have bought into this separation of church and state lie. Yep. So anything that the pastor says about government, well, that's off limits. Even though they would probably answer this correctly, that the three institutions God created so we can have a civil society is the home, the state, and the church. Yep. And the Bible says as much about government as it does about anything else, and it's just as biblical to preach on governance as it is to preach on the family.
When it has become a convenient belief for people today that I know Christians that or people that claim Christ, they go to church, but they have this notion that that you can't push like abortion. Yeah. How dare you push your morals off onto somebody else and tell them it's their right to make that choice? Yeah. And so it has the way this has progressed. It's now not just about government in general don't endorse candidates. It's don't push your morals on anybody in any circumstance for any reason at all.
Well, if you were the enemy of the church, the enemy of the gospel, what would you do? You'd want to silence them, wouldn't you? Mm-hmm. Well, how do you do that? Well, you're not going to just get them to be quiet. So here's what you do. You begin to convince them that there's certain things that are off limits. Right. You just can't talk about that.
Inappropriate.
Yeah. So then here's what happens. You stop talking about it. People begin to think, well, the Bible doesn't address that, I guess, or it's not important. And so then they disengage, and all of a sudden you start to take the salt and light out of governance.
Well, it spreads.
That's exactly right. So when salt and light is gone, what do you have? Decay and darkness. Right. Now look at government today. What do you have?
Decay and darkness.
Decay and darkness.
Well, one of the things that Christians have disengaged from government, and so now Satan is using government
to shut the church down.
Shut the church down and to destroy the family.
And that was always the plan. That was always the plan, but it starts with the pulpit. That's why these guys are so important. That's why the Black Regiment story matters. It's not just a trip down memory lane. It's that these guys were the tip of the spear. And that's why we won our independence. Right. Well, if the church doesn't become the tip of the spear again, primarily led by the pulpits, then we're going to lose. In fact, here's how I put it. The church presided over the sunrise of liberty in North America. If today's church doesn't wake up, we're going to preside over the sunset of liberty in North America.
Well, and I even read...
Well, he cut you off.
You cut me
off. He cut me off.
But I talk way more than Sam, so Sam, you go.
I saw that.
Then we'll pass it to Kelly.
All right.
We'll pass
okay,
Tim.
I'm sorry. I'm probably talking too much.
No skip card on Tim. I was even reading on about how communists would take over a country. They would infiltrate. They'd infiltrate schools, businesses, but they'd also infiltrate churches. And they would they purposely said, take that, turn the other cheek, and use it against them. Yeah. Make them where they will submit to the government and you can see how this is even played out in Utah. I was reading a book on the nuclear testing in Utah. They purposely said, well, we can do it in Utah because the Mormons will not question the government.
That's exactly right. Laissez-faire, hands off.
And now we have churches on every corner in America who have been conditioned and brainwashed and who are being led by limp-wristed preachers.
That's exactly right.
To submit and go through, just bow down to everything. Kelly, turn it over to you.
That's right. Dan, I have a question for you. Let's say that there's a minister out there right now who is somewhat questioning what you're saying.
Sure.
And he's thinking a lot about Romans 13, and you've just written a book on it.
Yeah.
What would you say to that guy to push him over the edge to see that maybe he's looking at it wrong?
Yeah. Well, I think I would ask him to consider, was Paul actually encouraging Christians to roll over and play dead when tyranny is snuffing out innocent lives, when tyranny is steamrolling justice, especially in a representative republic like ours? When Paul's writing, they're living under a dictatorship. There's not a whole lot those people could do. No, that's right. But here in America, the government operates by the consent of the governed. It's the Declaration of Independence.
We the people.
Right. Lincoln even says it at Gettysburg, government of, by, and for the people.
Right.
So the government in America is not in Washington, D.C., and it's not in Oklahoma City. It's right here. We are the government. So if we don't get engaged, we're disobeying God, because God tells, render to Caesar what is Caesar's. Well, in America, Caesar is us.
Because we can't detach ourselves in America from our responsibility to govern.
No, exactly
We're self-governed.
Right. No, it's exactly right. And so if the church does not engage, then what happens is we literally abdicate our responsibility to those who are godless. Well, they want to shut the gospel up. So if you look in countries where that has happened, for instance, just north of us, right now, pastors are being put in jail. I just played a video yesterday of Pastor Pawlowski, who was put in jail. But I can tell you one better than that. People say, well, that's Canada. Well, I just spoke in a church in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where the pastor's been arrested 33 times.
Whoa.
You know what his crime is? He won't shut his church down.
I've not heard about this.
Been arrested. His name's Tony Spell. He's been arrested 33 times, was actually at one time under house arrest where he couldn't walk over the threshold of his front door.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and this guy is, he is a corker, man. I mean, he's a Pentecostal guy, and I always say, well, those guys will go to heaven if they don't run past it. Well, they'll get to heaven if they don't run past it. But I mean, Tony is a great guy. And there was one Sunday when he was under house arrest, and he lives on the church campus. And so he told the authorities, he said, now look, I'm preaching Sunday, and I've got to walk through my front door to do that. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to preach, and then when I'm done, I'm going to sit down on the front pew, and you come arrest me. Well, his people lined the sidewalk, and he walked to church between his people.
Wow.
So he preaches. When he's done, he goes and sits down on the front pew, just like he said he would. The cops never came because, unfortunately, they got involved into a gunfight on the other side of town with a real outlaw,
actual criminal,
and couldn't come arrest the preacher. But he's been arrested 33. Right now, he's under parish arrest, which, of course, in Louisiana, instead of counties, they have parishes. And he can't get outside of his parish. See, Paul and I want to have him come speak at one of our Patriot Pastors boot camps. He can't leave his parish.
That's incredible.
Now, here's
an American pastor who cannot
Baton Rouge,
leave
Louisiana.
his parish.
Right, because he won't. He has a big banner wrapped around his marquee sign. He's got a pretty good sized church, but his church is exploding because of this. Yeah. Well, he's got this big banner wrapped around. When my wife and I went down there to speak, we came around the curve, and there's this big old banner that says "The Church That Never Closes." I think that is so cool. Yeah.
It's like
now
New
here's,
York.
and I won't name a name here, but one of the most well-known conservative Christian leaders in America is on the radio all the time. He's headquartered in Washington, D.C., actually stood with the authorities trying to talk Tony into shutting his church down and promised him free airtime on his radio show if he'd be quiet.
And 30 pieces of silver.
It's kind of like Tokyo Rose, right?
It's unbelievable. So when the church
sickening.
doesn't stand up, and notice, what is the one entity that they refuse to call essential service?
Yeah.
The church.
That's right.
Our own governor wouldn't. Paul and I tried in a conference call with about 300 or 400 pastors online. We asked the governor early in the COVID thing, will you declare churches essential services? And he refused to do it. He didn't say no. He just wouldn't say yes. And finally, we pushed him. He said, well, I have to get back to you on that.
Circle back around.
Coward. He's a coward.
Well, that's what I say.
And those preachers in America that are trashing the preachers getting arrested in Canada.
They're shameful.
They're shameful. They're
shameful.
cowards.
Well,
and if you're watching, I'll tell you, you're a coward.
It's
They're
shameful.
the
Exactly
same
right.
ones.
They should be
they're the
standing
same
up for their
ones.
brothers.
Yeah.
They are the same ones that refuse, no matter how convicted they might be, to go stand out in front of an abortion clinic.
Amen.
Oh, of
They're the
course.
same ones that refuse to go talk to a
you're
legislator
exactly
and
right.
say, quit compromising
Yeah.
and stop abortion. They're the same ones
Yeah.
that pick your political issue. We can't talk about it from the pulpit. We can't deal with those things. We stop dealing with government and then science. Look what we got. We got evolution.
Yeah.
Then
Let me tell you,
it has
Tim,
progressed all the way to just morals in general now. Nobody wants to listen to us.
You'll constantly hear these guys say this: you can't legislate morality. What do you
what-
legislate?
that's
The
what
weather?
legislation
Yeah.
is.
What are you going to legislate?
morality.
Oxygen? That's all it is.
That's what a law is.
That's exactly right. So the only question is, whose moral standard will be enforced? That's the
Somebody's.
only question. It's going to be somebody.
Well, when you sit there and say, well, what your right might not be my right, how do you legislate that? You can't. You have to legislate.
There's got to be a moral
something.
standard. There has to be
And
a moral standard.
It's just
Well, my Bible says that Jesus is the king.
That's exactly right. That's exactly
the moral
right. Well,
standard.
and
That's
see
right.
the genius of America, and I know we're not really doing this on history here tonight, but the genius of America is that when we were framed, when not just when we were founded with like the Pilgrims and others, but when they framed it, guys like Madison and others. I'm not saying they were all born again Christians, but they did it in an atmosphere where the church was the hub of the culture.
That's right.
And these preachers were so influential that these guys were influenced by that. So when you look at the foundations of our Republican form of government, it's kind of drenched with biblical principle.
Right.
And that's why it has stood for so long and protected our liberties. And even guys like John MacArthur, even though I respect John, I've always disagreed with him on Romans 13. Even he, though, has realized submission only goes so
I think
far.
John's
Right.
coming around now.
He is, because they threatened to put him in jail
Yeah.
if he didn't close his church out there in Southern California. He said, I'm just not going to do it.
Opened his eyes.
No, it's exactly right. And so, so Sam, what you said to pastors a while ago is so appropriate. These guys either need to get some courage and grow a spine or get out.
Right.
They're supposed to lead. The problem is, though, and I know you guys know this, it's not just in this area where they've compromised. They don't even believe the Bible.
Right.
I mean, these guys apologize for God. They won't preach on certain passages because they're controversial. In 2014, George Barna, now he's a Christian. I kind of know George. He's spoken at some of our events that we do. George did an official scientific study, and he was asking, because he's setting them up really, but he was asking pastors, does the Bible speak out clearly and boldly on all of the ills of our culture today? And over 90% of them, so you'll wonder what the other 10% was thinking, but over 90% of them said, yes, the Bible does. Okay, then he followed up with this question, are you going to preach on those? And about the same number said, no, we're not. Okay, so then he follows up with another question.
Suppress the truth.
Yeah, so he says, why not? The top two responses that came from pastors was, it will hurt our attendance and it'll hurt the size of our offerings.
Right.
They were honest, huh?
Those are top two responses. Well, that's the response of hirelings. And what did Jesus say about hirelings?
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
They're not the good shepherd. They won't lay their lives
Also
down
a
for the
response of a
sheep.
politician.
Oh, you're exactly right.
Votes
They
and
hate
money.
politicians so much, and yet they're the most political creatures.
They are.
Most denominations are the most political organizations you'll ever be around, and yet they preach against politics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
See,
why
the
they
thing-
won't come out to the abortion clinics.
Exactly.
Political.
And see, the thing about politics is really the word politics means the art and science of governance. We don't want the principles of God to be applied to that.
Right.
You don't want people who are making the laws that are going to affect how you can live to be thinking biblically. For Pete's sake, give me a
I
break.
mean, God went to the trouble of creating an entire law that we might
Exactly.
want to pick some ideas out of at some point.
Yeah. And the thing is, if we don't use that standard, then what standard are we going to use? And you can see the fallacy of it right now with the Dems in control in D.C. Although I don't believe the answers are in D.C., period. Right. I think it's time for states to begin to stand up and say, no, you never were supposed to be in charge. We were. We created you. You didn't create us.
Yeah. Right.
But if you watch in D.C. what's happening, the Dems are in charge. They have no moral standard. Their only standard is self-gratification and whatever feels good, do it, and all that kind of stuff. Look at the stuff they're doing. It makes zero sense, and it would destroy our culture. Yeah. There will not be a culture if those people have their way for very long.
Right.
So I don't know what part of this these preachers don't get, because the gospel will be driven underground.
Right.
And they won't be safe. If you study the history of any country that's gone Marxist, some of the first ones that are bumped off are preachers, intellectuals, artists, performers, landowners. They're the first ones killed and buried in these mass trenches.
So it's really a matter of loving your neighbor for ministers to start getting courage and talking about it.
No, it's exactly right.
Because people are never going to have enthusiasm on something if their preachers have zero enthusiasm.
Oh, exactly right.
No. If we love them, we don't offend them, right?
That just offended me.
I do.
No, I offend you because I do love you, and I'm telling you, and you're wrong. No, you're
it's
exactly
a win-win.
right.
I get to offend them,
and Kelly, here's
whether
the deal.
I love them or not.
And here's the deal. The person in the pew, they shouldn't think this way, but I know you know that they do. If the preacher doesn't talk about it, it must not be important.
Right.
That's the key right there.
There it is.
Preachers are not being honest to their own influence.
That's exactly right. And you'd say, well, surely people know. No, we have a number of generations that have been educated in our government schools now who've been taught not to think critically. Now, I'm not talking about critical race theory. I'm talking about thinking critically. Yes. Right. They've been taught not to do that. Don't think on your own. So they're just sitting there and they're waiting for their preacher. So if he doesn't deal with this, they assume it must not be important. So if it's not important, then what are they going to do about it?
So if a minister only mentions abortion annually, then he has taught them that it's not worth more than annually thinking.
No, it's exactly right. Yeah. On Sanctity of Life Sunday, and then that's it. We've done our deal. Now let's wait in Christmas, and we'll talk about the manger.
You've just told everyone that it doesn't matter.
That's exactly right.
But it should be in the back of your mind when you vote.
Yeah.
And that's about it.
Yeah. But I'll tell you when it will matter, when they're shutting these guys down like they're doing Tony Spell.
Right.
When they're arresting these guys. And they're going to find out that Donald Trump is a perfect case study. When Donald Trump was not a threat politically, Hollywood, the media, loved him.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You know, but you wait till he gets elected, and what did they do? They turned on him, and they hated his guts, and were the primary force, I believe, through fraud and all other kinds of things that got him thrown out.
Yeah.
Okay, these preachers who think that they're making all of these friends by kind of cutting around the edges, and I'll censor this, and I won't offend this group and all that, they will be the ones hated.
Yeah.
Eventually.
How much of that do you think is them doing it, being aware that that's what they're doing, or just subconsciously that's what they're doing?
I think they know exactly what they're doing.
I think a lot of them do.
And here's why I think they know. If they're saved, now I would say some of them probably aren't.
Yeah.
But if they're saved, the Spirit of God lives in them.
Amen.
And there is no way that they cannot know.
They're struggling. They're fighting.
Well, we've seen that with the abolition.
Of course.
What we do. And seen, preachers that were obviously convicted about it.
Yeah.
And they would talk to us about how they wanted to do that, but man, they couldn't get away from us fast enough.
Yeah. Well, here's what I found running for governor. Here's what I've found for years doing Black Robe. The smaller the church, the more willing the preacher is to stand for truth.
That's true.
The larger the church, the less willing. And I think here's what it is. The guys in the larger churches think they have too much to lose.
Yeah.
The guy in the smaller church has given his life not only to the Lord, but to God's call, and they're willing to lose it all.
Right. And he's already lost just the fact that he's a small church preacher.
Exactly right. He has nothing to protect. Yeah. There are most churches won't even have me to do this presentation. They won't even have me to do it. And I don't get up there and rail about politics. I get up there and throw out history that is proven. I mean, you really can't debate it. Now, you might debate that these guys shouldn't have done what they did, but you can't debate that they did it.
Right.
It's there. They won't even have me. And I know why. Because their people will say, why didn't you tell us about this? Now, what are you going to do about this? And they don't want to have to do anything. That might mess up some of their tea times.
Right. Or they'll have a deacon, they'll take him aside. You ain't supposed to be talking
Why
about
are you having
politics.
guys like this here?
No, it's exactly right. And so what he needs to do is go start a church. That's what he needs to do.
He did.
I mean, I tell these guys, look, the worst thing they can do is fire you. Okay. Right. Well, the minute they do, before you leave, tell everybody why and tell them where you're going to be next Sunday. Y'all come. I'm going to preach the truth.
Right.
Yep.
Right now, our church in Edmond is exploding. Now, a lot of pastors say that, but I'm telling you, it's happening to us. In the last 6 months, we've doubled. We've doubled.
Wow.
We don't know what to do with the people. We're doing 2 services, but that's not enough.
You can send some here.
Okay. But let me tell you, without fail, here's what they're all telling us. Most of them are coming from much larger churches. And they're saying, guys, we've had it with preachers that won't address the issues and churches that won't take a stand. Right. And we're coming to your church, and we thank God for you.
Amen.
I mean, I've never seen anything like this, to be honest with you. It's the most amazing thing. And
that makes me want to go to your church now.
Well, I mean, it's just a phenomenon. And here's the crazy thing. I teach an auditorium class on Sunday mornings, and then Paul and I switch preaching on Sundays. My class has over 200 in the auditorium class. I have twice that many watching live online. Not later in the week. They'll do that too. That'll go up into the thousands. I'll have twice as many watching live while I'm teaching the class. I have a class of over 600.
Wow.
It's just unbelievable. So people are hungry. That's a good sign, by the way.
Yes.
Now, I think it's the remnant, but that's okay. Right. God tends to always want to use the remnant anyway.
Right.
But I think the remnant is finally starting to understand we're done. We're done. We want the truth. And so maybe there's hope.
They don't want a life coach.
No.
They don't want a pretty boy.
No, they don't want biblical psychology and all that kind of
influencer.
stuff. No.
They want a preacher of the Word of God.
I think it seems like...
You're perfect for him, Sam.
Man, Sam.
Well, it seems
Follow
like
me on Instagram.
You wear skinny jeans?
I've
He does, but they're not actually supposed to be skinny jeans.
Well, here's what you do. When you wear the skinny jeans and they don't work right, just tell them to turn the fog machine up. Ooh, lots more fog.
I need a fog machine. Purple haze coming
Blue
in.
lights.
Go ahead, Tim.
I don't even remember what I was going to say now.
Make something up.
Well, let me say to you that I really believe that this is a moment where we can actually shine.
Right.
I really do. I think that the days in America right now are similar in some ways to 1774, 1775. I don't know that we're in 1776 yet. I'm not suggesting necessarily that we're all going to be pulling triggers. My point is, I don't know that we've come to the actual clash, however that's going to play out in America. But I believe America is irreconcilably divided.
Right.
If you look at America, we have 2 cultures trying to live under the same government. Now, that was never the intent of the founders and the framers to begin with. Washington was not supposed to be the monolithic government that governs everybody. But we are so irreconcilably divided today, you couldn't do it even if you wanted to. Yeah. Because no matter what law you make, no matter what policy you enforce, you alienate at least half of the country. Yeah. So I think this is a moment for us. I really do.
You know, that's the beauty of our form of government, actually, if it's done right. If the people in California want to do what the people in California want to do, fine, go to California.
Yeah. And if you're there and you don't like it, come to Oklahoma or Texas. Yeah. Well, that's what's happening.
Go to Texas.
But if you do, leave the liberal garbage.
Yes.
I totally agree.
But
you know what I'm hearing? Yeah. I'm hearing that actually is happening more than it's not.
Yeah.
Did you know that last year California lost over 1 million people? They lost a congressional seat.
Yes.
And most of the people that are leaving California are not just leaving because of the taxes. That obviously is a reason. But most of them are leaving because they just can't take it anymore. Yeah. And what this is that's the conservative remnant. Yeah. I don't know if they're all Christians, but that's the conservative remnant that has stayed with it just as long as they can, and they're done.
Yeah.
I was in Home Depot the other day, and I was wearing my Free the States, Abolition, blah, blah, whatever shirt. And the guy helping me get a weed eater, he goes, I like that shirt. And I go, oh, yeah. He goes, I just moved here from California.
Oh.
And I go, really? And I said, you got sick of those taxes? And he goes, yeah, but it was also stuff like that. And he points at the shirt. And I'm going, all right, well, you came to the right place, buddy.
That's right. Exactly right. So this is the time for the modern Black Regiment to rise up. This is the time for Christians to find out, what does Romans 13 really say?
That's right.
It's time for them to stop attending their dead church and supporting it and go support a guy that's got the guts to preach the truth. He needs their support, their help. Right. It's time for them. It's time for the remnant to rise up, be the church, because the rest of the church, I'm not even sure, is the church. Yeah. They're just a religious club. But the real church, it's time for that church to solidify.
You know, I once had somebody tell me that there was a situation that was taking place where I was taking a stand on something, and
you took a stand?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Nobody else really wanted to, and I was talking to one of the other pastors that was involved in the situation. He said, man, if it ever comes to it, we'll be in a jail cell next to you preaching against homosexuality and I was like, well, it might be nice if you would preach it next to me now before we end up.
So we don't have to be in
jail
jail.
Cell.
No, that's exactly right.
Once the Supreme Court says that they can preach.
Well, once the court tells you can, then you can go ahead and do that.
Well, I think that's part of the problem is these guys think that, well, if it ever really gets there, I'll stand.
No, you won't.
We're there. No, if you won't do it now. People always say, well, if I ever had to, I'd die for Jesus. I always say, well, if you won't live for him, you won't die for him.
That's right.
So that's just the way it is. This book is not about the framers, but they're all in here.
Right.
Let me tell you, those 55 guys that signed that declaration, they really did believe they were signing their death warrants.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And when Franklin says we better hang together or we'll hang separately, that wasn't a joke. Now, he was kind of sharing it to lighten the mood, but he really meant that. Yeah. I have little excerpts in this book from letters from preachers that were out on the field writing back to their families. And they clearly articulated that if we lose, I'm a dead man. They're going to hang me. Yeah. I even tell the story in my presentation, the very last preacher I actually act on stage. I become John Rossbrugg, and he was a pastor in rural New Jersey. And he was captured. It's a long story, but he was captured by the Hessians, which were the German mercenaries that the British brought over. And he tries to surrender, and they laugh at him. And so before they kill him, he prays, and he prays out loud, and he prays for them and all. They bayonet him to death, and he's buried today in Trenton. In those days, probably a little bit outside the town of Trenton, New Jersey. But they would murder these Black Robe guys. If they caught them on the battlefield, they would kill them. And the reason we know how he died is one of the Hessians ran into Trenton bragging, holding his pocket watch and a couple of other personal items, saying, we just killed a rebel preacher. And was bragging about that.
Because they know they're dealing with more than just a foot soldier.
It's exactly
a guy with ideas in the mouth.
It's exactly
You smite the shepherd and the sheep will scatter.
No, that's right. And that's why this is so critical for today. And I really appreciate you guys, because obviously you're part of this group.
Right.
You're standing for something, and I think God is going to use people like us. I don't know what the future of our republic is. I have a lot of people ask me constantly. I look at our state, and having served in the legislature, wow, I'm kind of like Peter Marshall when he used to be the chaplain of the U.S. Senate. He said, my job is to pray for the Senate every morning. He says, but normally I look at the Senate and I pray for America. Yeah, that's true. And you know, here I've served in the legislature, and I know the dirty tricks that these Republicans play. I know we didn't get into all this in this discussion.
That's an entire episode.
Buddy, let me tell you, I've got stories that would make people so angry, they'd want to go to the Capitol. And I'm talking about the Oklahoma Capitol with pitchforks and torches. Those guys down there and gals are selling us down the river.
Right. They're evil.
They are, but they know how to campaign. They know the phrases and the cliches to use. I'm pro-life, I'm pro-gun, all this kind of stuff.
A lot of them are lawyers.
No, they are. Many of them are attorneys.
I just had Joseph Silk at my church Sunday.
Oh, yeah, really?
And one of the things that he and I talk about usually, because I've had experience down there lobbying.
Yeah, well, I know. You know the place.
And that usually he'll tell me after I've said what I've said about there being maybe 5 or 6 down there that have a principle in their body. He'll say, you're being kind.
No, that's right. It's probably not that many.
Yeah. So
no, and you know, and they don't go in that way. That's the really sad thing, because I've known many of them who came in bushy-tailed, bright-eyed. They're ready to go. But they like being called the honorable Senator so-and-so,
Yes.
Representative this.
Like the chief seats.
Yeah, and they get courted by the lobbyists, by the leadership, and before you know it, that chairmanship really looks enticing. And I'd love to be chairman so-and-so, and and then, of course, and then there are sometimes messages like, "Hey, I know you're really trying to promote this bill. If you'll help us on this, we'll see to it that this bill of yours gets through." So you buy things, you sell your soul, and it's really, really sad what happens.
Dan, on that same vein of thought, we have several new senators in there who are coming in there bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, as you said, and 2 abolitionists now, and a couple of other guys that are new that I think we might win them over to our side. What's advice that you would give them about how not to let that process happen to them?
Yeah. The first thing I would say is don't care about your career. Just bury that. Jesus said that if you're not willing to lose your life for my sake, you'll never find it. If you're going to be my disciple, you pick up the cross and you follow me. And we all know that the cross was not a piece of jewelry in those days. It's how you get executed. So in my days growing up, he would have said, pick up your electric chair and follow me. Yeah. And so these guys, number one, need to lay their political career on the altar and say, I don't care. Right. Now, they don't need to be belligerent or I don't care, not like that, but they need to be willing to stand for what is right, no matter what it does to their career. That would be the first thing. The second thing that I would say to them is you better know for sure that you know. Know these principles. Know what it is you believe, because you're going to be tested, and these people don't come up to you and ask you to betray your faith. They don't come up to you and say, hey, why don't you, would you betray your principles today for me? That's not how they do it. Right. They're very deceptive. Yep. And so they come at different angles, and you better know what you believe, and you better be willing to stick to it no matter
Well, we need to get your books to these guys.
Yeah, I mean, they would be. There's another book written by a guy named Matt Trewhella.
Yep.
And it's entitled, The Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrates. Yeah, they need that book as well, because it helps them to understand their role. Because, see, most of the guys at the legislature, I'm talking about here in Oklahoma, they believe they're servants of the federal government in D.C. It's what they think. Yeah. And every time I would say something about, let's buck this, no. They say, what's the feds going to do? I said, who cares?
Who cares what the feds are going to do?
But they really are afraid. They really do think that they're the servants of the federal government.
Like you said, the public education system
for
decades now has,
it has betrayed them.
Has taught them to not think about things.
That's why I'm telling parents, if you care about your kids' future, get them out of government schools now. I don't care if you can send them to Christian school, homeschool co-op. We have 4 different homeschool co-ops that meet in our church.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic.
Go on starting at ours.
Yeah, that's good, man, because those government schools will destroy your children. Yes. They just will.
Yep.
I think 3 of us need to go down there and personally give some of these books to our buddies down there.
I think so.
Well, I'll help you make it happen.
All right.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We appreciate you coming, Dan.
Well, thank you, guys. It's just been marvelous.
Thank you so much, Dan.
I've enjoyed it.
I appreciate what you guys are doing.
And I would like to say thank you for adding me as a friend on Facebook.
Finally.
You're so welcome.
Yes, it took you a year.
You're going to regret that.
It actually wasn't me, but
I'll accept that.
Okay.
As the person he pays.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, before we go,
yes, sir.
Let's mention your books again.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, sure.
Before you do that, before you tune out, after Dan does that, we're going to add a video onto this of him showing us the toys that he brought.
Yeah.
A couple muskets, a sword, and a rifle. So hang on.
Yeah, at the end of this video, we're going to add another clip.
And those are just pieces of this traveling museum that we have. So if they ever get a chance to see me do this live, they ought to do it. Yeah. Even if they have to skip their church one Sunday. I mean, really, because...
Are you going to be doing this sometime soon?
Yeah, in fact, I'm doing it in Bartlesville Thursday night.
Okay, Bartlesville.
Yeah, the Sons and Daughters of the American Revolution are having me at the First Wesleyan Church of Bartlesville.
The Wesleyans.
Yeah.
So the actual Methodists.
Yes.
Yeah, that's exactly
the real, true Methodists.
Just let me promote these again. This is the book on the Black Robe Regiment entitled Bringing Back the Black Robe Regiment.
Bringing it back.
And this is more of a textbook, although it's written so you can read it, but it's a challenge.
Speaking of homeschool.
Yeah, man, this is
for homeschoolers.
Yeah, exactly. This tells their story over 100 sources of the bibliography. There's over 600 footnotes in this book.
Wow.
So this is the book. This is the book on Romans 13, where I try my very best to show that what most people have been taught of Romans 13 is not correct. And then this is a video. We have it in Blu-ray and just the older DVD format, but it's the same thing, where we paid an actual movie company. And this is a 90-minute documentary where I'm on location. We have actors and actresses that do little vignettes. We have reenactors that are doing stuff. I'm in period costume. It just gives the story for those who might not be willing to read this first, but might want to see this. And then they would want to read this.
Now, say it again. Where can everybody get all this?
Yeah, my website is easy. It's Dan Fisher, BRR, Black Robe Regiment, BRR.com.
Okay, awesome. We'll try to make sure we get that in the
I will put it in
comments or the
cool. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
We appreciate you coming.
Oh, it's my privilege.
Do we need to pray for your voice,
I think
brother?
You probably better.
You need to come fill in Sunday?
It's pretty much on its way out right now.
Dan can come down.
You fill in for him.
Yeah, well, it's probably...
I'll fill in for you. You fill in for me at my church.
Okay, well, it's probably the prayers of your people being answered.
It might be. Have you been talking to my folks?
He's been talking to your deacon.
Are you ready for it, Tim? You ready for it? Stay salty, Oklahoma.
I'm going ahead and recording. He can edit it.
Yeah, okay. Oh, great. Well, hey, guys, I was able to bring a few of the items from our traveling museum that we use when we do the Black Robe presentation. And some of these are not in the museum, but they're part of our collection. And so the guys wanted me just to give you a little bit of a story. Let's begin with this Flintlock musket here. This was carried by a Continental soldier named Adam Miller at the Battle of Oriskany in New York on August the 6th, 1777. And basically what happens is he's captured by the Iroquois Indians during the battle, and they're going to kill him. And his commander shoots the head Indian. That allows him to break free. He picks this musket up because he had given up his and begins to fight. And then he notices his captain has been captured, and they've pinned him to the ground by running a bayonet through each thigh. And they're going to torture him to death. So Miller runs up with this very musket, brains one of those braves, is able to free his captain, and fights through the rest of the battle, obviously survives with this musket. And then after the battle, sometime, carves his name, A. Miller, and then phonetically Oriskany, for Oriskany, New York. It's not the way it's spelled, but that's the way the Indians spelled it, 1777. This is a really cool piece out of our history. Let's do one more from the War of Independence, and then we'll look at some other items. This is a flintlock musket that was made by a man by the name of Samuel Barrett. You can see the S. Barrett there. Samuel Barrett was a deacon in the church at Concord, Massachusetts. And Samuel's uncle, Colonel James Barrett, owned the farm that sits on a hill that today is called Barrett Hill, and it overlooks the Old North Bridge in Concord. And if you know about the Battle of Concord, that's where the Continental Militia was. They came down off of the hill and fought the British at the Old North Bridge. Well, this musket was made by the nephew of Colonel James Barrett. Then it was carried by a New Hampshire soldier. In fact, he was a member of the New Hampshire militia. He carved this in. His name was Jeremiah Kimball. And he was a cabinet maker. So sometime either during the war or after, he carved in some of the places where he fought. And then right here, he carved in Ticonderoga, 1776. So this flintlock not only has connections to Concord, Massachusetts, but to many of the great battles of our War of Independence. Now, Kelly is holding an item from a different era. This is a 4570 Remington rolling block carbine. This carbine was carried by an Apache brave by the name of Perico, and he was one of the two gentlemen. His brother was also second in command under the Apache chief Geronimo. And at the surrender of Geronimo and his braves at Skeleton Canyon in Arizona Territory in 1886 on September the 4th, Perico surrendered this carbine, and actually the Army, you're not probably going to be able to see it, but if you can do a close-up, the Army engraved all of the circumstances surrounding this being surrendered by the Apache warrior, Perico, Arizona Territory, Skeleton Canyon. And then they were taken to Fort Bowie, and here's the stamp of Fort Bowie right here. And then there's an FB here on the barrel. So this was carried by Perico. He ended up at Fort Sill and became Chief Perico and is buried down there. So this has a great Oklahoma history as well as being the carbine that was carried by the Apache warrior Perico. So that is pretty doggone cool.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
I can feel the Cherokee in me.
There you go.
Do something
on the
right
warpath,
now.
aren't you? I thought so. Okay, here's the last thing that we'll show you. Now this is from an era preceding the Indian Wars. This was used in the war between North and South. This was a sword carried by a soldier from West Virginia, and his name was William Harris. William Harris was a cavalry captain, and on the third day of the Battle of Gettysburg, so that's going to be July the 3rd, 1863, there was an ill-fated cavalry charge ordered after Pickett's charge. So we know through history that the Battle of Gettysburg is pretty much over then, but they didn't know that, and so the Union command ordered this cavalry unit to charge the soldiers that had tried to take Little Round Top on July the 2nd, the day before. But these guys are entrenched now, so it's kind of a suicidal mission. And during that attack, William Harris is killed carrying this sword. He is buried in the National Cemetery there in Gettysburg, and so this was his sword that he was carrying during that attack. And when he fell, he had this sword strapped to his side and probably was waving the sword. So these are just a few of the items that we have that I think are really cool. As a lover of history, it's really neat to kind of hold these, isn't it?
It's really
I mean, you know, because they've been there and done that. So it's just really cool, and I appreciate you guys letting me bring them and kind of let me talk about them a little bit.
Well, thank you for coming.
Oh, man.